We have new reports coming out that reveal the Toronto Raptors' plans heading into this year's trade deadline. As we know, the Toronto Raptors have a ton of veterans on this team that is currently in a rebuild, that is currently not winning a ton of games over the course of this season, that other competitive teams are going to be interested in acquiring at this year's trade deadline. That's been widely reported. That's been widely discussed. Names like Bruce Brown, Kelly Olynyk, Chris Boucher, Jakob Poeltl, they have all been desired by other teams across the NBA. This is not novel news, but with the trade deadline just weeks away here now at this point, with the Raptors having a better feel as to how their roster's looking, how players are playing, how things are shaping up, and now with the core group of this Raptors team back into the mix, RJ Barrett, IQ, Scottie Barnes healthy, we know the Raptors' approach, according to recent reports, in terms of how they are looking at this year's trade deadline, and some of it makes sense, and some of it's going to lead to some heated debates by Toronto Raptors fans about what the Toronto Raptors should do going forward. So lots of stuff to dive into in this video, but before we do, folks, again, if you want to stay up to date with everything regarding this Toronto Raptors team heading into this year's trade deadline, as this season chugs along, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button because we're doing daily Toronto Raptors coverage out here on the channel. Over 67% haven't hit the subscribe button just yet. So if you're part of that 67%, you're enjoying the daily vids, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button. But let's dive into the news. Let's dive into what's kind of been going on here now at this point, because again, we know the names. Bruce Brown, Chris Boucher, Kelly Olynyk, these types of dudes. But as weeks go along, we hear different things about who's going to get involved in trade rumors, reports, and things like that. But now we do have a new update coming from Mark Stein that essentially reveals what the Toronto Raptors' approach is here now at this point, as the Raptors to this point have resisted mounting trade interest in center Jakob Poeltl, according to league sources. So that's the first thing, which doesn't seem too insane, doesn't seem too crazy here now at this point, because Jakob Poeltl has been great, and the Toronto Raptors are losing games regardless. Jakob Poeltl is not old wash over the hill by any stretch of the imagination, and he is essentially crucial to what the Toronto Raptors are going to be doing out here in the future. We don't really have any other centers that are imminently ready to be the anchor of the defense. I mean, we can look at a guy like Ulrich Schamche and say, hey, maybe he's the future years down the line, and that's a cool thing to sort of project, but he's the 57th overall pick. He's very raw. We'll see how he actually develops. Kelly Olynyk's a guy that, again, he's out built for the future. He's 4 years older than Jakob Poeltl, and doesn't play too much defense. We'll talk about him later in this video, but there aren't many other options out there at the center position. We don't know what draft picks are to get, so it's right now we're reliant on Jakob Poeltl to have any semblance of a competent defense out there for this Raptors squad. So even if you're like, hey, let's bottom out, let's figure it out in the future. I mean, it's tough. We spent 2 years trying to bring in a new center after losing Marc Gasol as well as Serge Ibaka during that 2021 offseason, 2020, I don't know what specific summer. It was a weird summer. It was the COVID one where, it was December, so it wasn't even summer. But that offseason, we lost Jakob Poeltl, or we lost Marc Gasol, we lost Serge Ibaka, and it took multiple seasons to bring in a guy the caliber of Jakob Poeltl. So trading him away, even if you get like a decent package of return, it's not like one of those deals where it's like, oh, the Raptors are bad, we could take on salary and stuff. We'd be cooked for a couple seasons for sure if Jakob Poeltl's on the mix. I imagine the Toronto Raptors have plans of, speeding up this rebuild a little bit faster than, being 3-4 seasons down the line when we're back to a competent team. So makes sense the Raptors are resisting trades for Jakob Poeltl. Of course, if a team does blow you away, 3 first-round picks, a lot, like all that type of stuff, I'm sure Masai Ujiri isn't saying, oh, Jakob Poeltl's untouchable, right? We'll figure it out here at that point if you get that many assets. But I feel like looking at the Toronto Raptors, they're like, oh, the Raptors don't have a ton of leverage. They're not a great team. They got to get rid of guys. Yada, yada, yada. There's probably not crazy lucrative offers coming in for Jakob Poeltl right now. Of course, he's having a phenomenal season as teams get more and more desperate heading into the trade deadline. And then, of course, you might get some better offers. But right now, there are a ton of centers out there on the open market in terms of guys like DeAndre Ayton, in terms of guys like Robert Williams. There are some different pieces that other teams do have options for. So maybe close to the trade deadline, you get some absolutely insane deal. But, of course, that hasn't really arose. We haven't heard those types of rumors. So it makes sense that the Toronto Raptors are not too interested in dealing away Jakob Poeltl right now. But the guys, and again, taking a look at his stats, right? We should discuss this. Jakob Poeltl's averaging 50 points per game, 11 rebounds, 2.6 assists. He's been good. He's only 29 years old. So, of course, as a guy you just don't want to give away for nothing. Like one random thing doesn't really make a ton of sense. And that trade that we made a couple years ago before that ended up acquiring Jakob Poeltl, I mean, the guy that they got back was Rob Dillingham, who is a cool player, the first that ended up going to the Minnesota Timberwolves, but he hasn't really been an impact player yet. So that is what it is. But we do have other names mentioned in this report, as Bruce Brown and Kelly Olynyk are regarded as the most coveted veterans for Toronto, and that they are the guys that they are most interested in trading before this year's trade deadline. Now, one of the names makes sense. Yeah, Bruce Brown's contract was brought back to essentially facilitate a trade, and his stats are horrible right now, but it's a very, very small sample size. He's returning from injury, all that type of stuff, averaging 7 points per game, 2 rebounds, 1 assist, 25% from the three-point line, 38% from the field, but over the course of his career, he's been a lot better, and there's been significant trade interest in Bruce Brown over the past couple of seasons. There was rumors that we could have got a first-round pick for him at the trade deadline last year. Of course, he ended up dealing with an injury after that point, and all that type of stuff, but it was a less strong NBA draft, so I'm not too stressed about not getting that pick there for Bruce Brown and at this point. But we all know Bruce Brown is a guy that is covered across the league, even despite stats, all that type of stuff. So, Bruce Brown is a guy that I would be shocked. I made a whole video, about him being involved in one of those. Jimmy Butler as the third team, as a key sort of contract in one of those deals. But regardless if that doesn't fall through, if that doesn't happen, this team can facilitate something. There are a lot of guys that are going to pop up in the rumor mill and the trade mill over the coming weeks, and Bruce Brown's salary is going to be, the Raptors are one of the only teams that have salary to essentially match that here now at this point. So Bruce Brown, interesting player, interesting piece of the trade market, but the interesting fact is that Kelly Olynyk's name was brought up over a guy like Chris Boucher, who Kelly Olynyk this season has not been that solid in terms of, he's been all right. He's been better in recent games, 7 points per game, 4 rebounds, 2 assists. Defensively, there are some concerns, but he does shoot 48% from behind the three-point line, shooting 67% on corner threes. So that is a skill set that is needed in the front court for a lot of NBA teams. So he's a player that is interesting to me because the lack of defense, as well as the multiple years on his contract, might make him a little bit less intriguing for specific teams out there looking for a role player big man. But of course, the three-point shooting percentage being that high is intriguing. But the fact that he's named over Chris Boucher, who's a dude that is averaging more points per game, 10 points per game, 4 rebounds, less three-point efficiency, but of course brings more of a level of defense on the defensive end, and is a guy that is an expiring contract, is an impending free agent. So I'd be more surprised if Chris Boucher doesn't get traded over a Kelly Olynyk, even though despite the fact that Kelly Olynyk is the guy that's been brought up in more and more trade reports, rumors, discussions than a Chris Boucher in recent weeks. But honestly, all three of these guys feel like actual trade candidates, depending on what different teams, with different rosters, what they want. Kelly Olynyk did sign a multi-year deal with us, so it felt like when he signed that contract, he was going to be the vet, was going to be the old guy, the road to help guide and mentor some of the young guys out here on this Toronto Raptors squad. But of course, we'll see how things actually shake out heading into this year's trade deadline. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. You guys best think as far. Subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already. Anyways, I'm signing out. Cheers.